have nothing choreographed. I don't do a lot of pre-planning, desiring this to be spontaneous. But it is an effort to try to gain more perspective, a better perspective of what happened in the past and the parallels to it now. We as a people of the red race, at one point through the Department of Justice, was identified as having a 400% higher mortality rate than any other ethnic population in the United States. We also have the highest incident of diabetes of any other ethnic population. We have a high level of addiction and alcohol problems. And I will share with you that I was once an alcoholic. And the reason I drank was to have a few moments where I was free from the assassins that had been sent out to kill me. I was contributing to their effort, and I wanted out of that genre. I want to find and continue to pursue a better way of life, not just as an Indian, but especially as a human being. One of the things that we're seeing today, excuse me, is a rising level of autism and dyslexia. In the public today, there's a rising level of dysfunction and suicide. In the process of trying to address the residuals that we experienced as a people, trauma became identified to us as a level of stress that we could not process, was never meant for human beings to experience or be subjected to. There is a media out there that thinks that the more stress that they add, the greater control they have, forcing people into a certain mindset and compliance, presenting the false idea that if we comply, things will get better. If we do or follow the context of what's being presented to us, we'll be better. The media is used to instigate wars, instigate racism, promote governmental policy, or demote it, depending on what it is. But I mentioned to you about the trauma. One of the things that was discovered by medical scientists was that a woman who was in her 4th trimester of pregnancy who was undergoing trauma, that she could not process the chances of her child being born with the baby's brain not being wired right were high. And I'd like for you for a moment to think about the fact that because there are parallels to it today in this society, that our tribes relocated west. A lot of them were centered in Oklahoma. And of course, back then it wasn't called Oklahoma, it was called Indian Territory. Reservations were established, and many tribes were made neighbors who had never known that kind of relationship and had never been exposed to the kind of environment that's in Oklahoma. It's understood that it took 2 to 3 generations for the people to acclimate to this new environment. And in the process, many didn't survive. The government rations that were promised were poor in coming, and most of the rations had been skimmed off, with the best taken by Indian agents and sold or used to their benefit. And the people got what's left. You know, one of the things that we promote in our luncheons and so forth is fry bread. And how fry bread came about was that when those rations came, we got the flour and we got the lard and we got sugar and we got salt. And because we were starving, we made fry bread and we ate fry bread. A lot of times it was the only meal we had. My wife comes from a Cherokee and Choctaw background, and her family at one time had been relocated to the area near Tulsa, Oklahoma. When oil was discovered in Oklahoma, the land was open to settlement, and the tribes were not only incarcerated on reservations there, but then they were affected by the large influx of people that came when the land grab went on in Oklahoma, and there was a lot of conflict. And of course, this conflict led to military intervention, and in the military intervention, we died. Once it was open to settlement in Oklahoma, my wife's family, was moved. They relocated to Arkansas, and they became sharecroppers in Arkansas, and they were known as French and not known as Cherokee and Choctaw. It was safer if they weren't Cherokee and Choctaw. And gradually, my wife's family, because of the auto factories and the job opportunities in Michigan, moved to Michigan. And she and I met in 1967, and 2.5 months later, we were married. We came together extremely damaged, struggling, and needing each other and holding on to each other and helping each other to recover. We had these residuals, this background. But I mentioned the effects of trauma on human lives. There is some stress in life just to want to progress and get better. There is a healthy stress, but there is a stress that is not healthy. But there are political interests and religious interests that found out that the more stress there was, the easier it was to manipulate people into certain mindsets. It has also been discovered by psychologists that when we begin to talk about these things and what happened to us in the boarding schools and on the reservations, we began recovering. And my purpose for posting is to help in our recovery and help educate an uneducated public. I will share with you that I went through an educational process, interested in becoming a minister. Originally, my ministry was centered around the gospel and a search for truth. And it's developed into 30,000 hours of research into historical trauma and the boarding school residuals that our people struggle with. One of the things that's been discovered, that the more that we talked about historical trauma in the boarding schools, especially with our children, that their brains begin to rewire and they begin to think in a better way. When I mentioned how trauma affected the brain in the 4th trimester of pregnancy, when the baby's brain was forming at its greatest rate and the mother was experiencing this kind of trauma, the baby's brain didn't wire right. And so when the baby was born, the standard kind of information and training that went to a child that had a fairly normal experience in the womb, this baby and the one that had the good experience could process things better than the one that didn't. It was necessary to start looking at these things and trying to make the adjustments necessary. Canada provided over $300 million to create a recovery process that was not run by the government, but it was run by the tribes and the therapists in the tribes, and they brought whole families in to deal with trauma and its residuals. And one of the things that was declared out of this effort was the fact that they didn't understand why the tribes in the United States and the government didn't follow, because the boarding school idea began with Carlisle and went on into the reserve schools that peppered Canada. And if you're interested in learning something about that, there is a video on YouTube called Unrepentant by a friend of mine. And in that video, you will hear the testimonies of Native people who experienced these reserve schools and what happened to them. I mentioned the other day that one of the things that I'm impressed with today is the fact that as Native people, indigenous people of this continent, we're soberer than we ever have been before. We're cleaner than we ever have been before. When my wife and I began Dawnland Native Ministries and started this effort, it is said that we were one of 5 people in the United States that were really focusing on this at the level we were. Barbara and I felt it so important that we purchased a motorhome, a 1973 Ford motorhome that looked pretty rough from the outside, but it ran well. And we traveled 12,000 miles in 10 months to visit with all the tribes we could reach in the Northwest, down through California into Arizona, Oklahoma, back to Tennessee, and then north to Michigan again. We were fortunate to be able to meet with a lot of people that we might have never known otherwise. Our desire was to draw attention to the impact of this in our lives as a people. We visited a tribe and visited with the vice chair and the person who was over their health program. And we talked to them about why we were there and why we were doing what we were doing. And the health director said, well, we really don't have a problem with that here. And I said, let me ask you something. I said, do you have suicides here? And she said, yes. I said, do you have spousal abuse and child abuse here? And she said, yes. I said, do you have a problem with alcohol and drug addiction here? And she said, yes. I said, do you have a problem with high crime here? She said, yes. I said, those are all the indications of the presence of historical trauma, because that is not normal to the way that we lived and the way we should live. I said, historical trauma is here, but I said, let me share this with you, that on the East Coast, there are tribes that have been so devastated and so assaulted that they are going back to the history books and whatever resources they find to find their language, to find pictures of how they dressed, and listen to what was published about the elders and from the elders, so that they could begin a recovery. I don't know how important this is in us reaching our spiritual destination. I know it's healthier than what we know. I know that we can get better at loving each other and taking care of each other, reaching out to each other. And today I'm speaking on behalf of all of those victims of the boarding schools and the reservations. And there were millions of them. It's estimated that in the year 1700, there was 122 million of us on this continent. And there are archaeological digs that have been done and computer mock-ups made of what those villages looked like. And there were buildings and paved streets and aqueducts and all kinds of evidence of a civilization that existed thousands of years ago. And I've shared with you that we are all related. All of us come from 4 men and their wives who survived a flood. And we as a people had those sacred places we went to where we went to pray. They were our cathedrals, like the Black Hills and Bear Butte. and other places around this country that our people went to pray and fast and seek the will of the Creator for our lives. I would remind you that in our relocation, and it wasn't just Indian territory, but it was the area out near Pahrump, Nevada to Middleville, California, Native people taken out of an environment that they were used to and had lived in, some in arid, not arid climates, but in rainforests and in the areas in like Louisiana and Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and moved to an arid climate where it was dry and there was little water and there was little game to hunt, and then trying to survive. We are in a survival mode today. And as Native people, we need each other more so than ever before. And I say to our people that we have allowed influences to define how we conduct our lives, and one of those is the idea of blood quantum. It's my opinion that if you have one drop of Indian blood and you feel that you're in your heart, you're as much Indian as anyone else. But in our idea and the promotion of blood quantum, we've become prejudiced. I've seen it. The full bloods looking at the half bloods, the half bloods looking at the quarter bloods, and the quarter bloods looking at those that are an eighth and a 16th and a 32nd, as though they don't have the right to claim who they are. And the reality is, even with the full bloods, there was an effort to destroy our identity by destroying our culture and our language and our consciousness of our relationship with the Creator. The damage that was done to us was more spiritual than it was physical. And if you'll notice in the title of this, I changed it to Dawnland, the rising of the sun. If I were going to define my spiritual existence at this point, it's similar to the ghost dancers. I pray for my oppressors. I have no weapons to bear against any man, and I worship the Creator in a certain way. And my way of worship is in prayer, in my studies, in our ceremonies, and in our powwows. I enjoy getting together with the people, and I love the exchange that goes on that's helping us all recover. There are those among us who are toxic, and they're damaged, and they have a hard time processing anything that is positive. I do not advocate for the religions, especially the Western religions, because they were prejudiced when they came here. And I have said I'm going to create my next video is going to be comprised of documents from the Avalon Project, Yale University, because I think we need to be more aware of the mindset that came here with the Europeans. And I'll share with you, there was nothing righteous about it. The one thing that they did bring is the book itself. One elder said, they came here and they wanted our land. Now they've got the land, but we've got their book. And one of the things I discovered in reading and studying this book for over 50 years is there was nothing authorizing them to do what they did to us. I send my greetings out to you all. I realize that in a lot of areas this is probably going to sound caustic, challenging, but I think we need to be challenged a little bit so that we can move out of this mindset that the world would put on us, the Western world and its influences. So I pray you have a good day and God keeps you. In Jesus' name I pray.